So this is sort of a Q and A, Anna ask me anything, I guess, looking at the field of trauma and trauma-informed care, looking at trauma healing. Um, so hopefully, it's not okay. There's still some problems um, with things being frozen, and that might be a glitch with the internet issues. So anyone else able to hear, or just still doing some testing here, making sure we're on sound good, visual good. Okay. Well, it looks I'm not seeing any responses, so hopefully everything's good. Let me just see, so it looks like okay, looks like we're still good. Yeah. So, Bill, this is definitely, time for just, asking questions, so feel free to, um, ask your questions and, um, I mean, I can go on and just talk, but, this is more about just kind of again, a spontaneous opening just to talk about issues around trauma champions and trauma-informed care, trauma therapy, trauma healing. So, yeah, if you have questions, go ahead and I'll try to respond to them in what order that I see them come up. So, a little about me as we're waiting on any questions is that I am a licensed marriage family therapist, been working in the field for over 30 years, working specifically around the area of trauma and trauma informed care. And um, someone recently asked me, you know, what is trauma informed care? And uh, and I wrote a Substack article to this effect as well. Uh, that was basically 4 words: realize, recognize, respond, and resist. These are the 4 R's of trauma informed care as they are outlined by SAMHSA, which is the acronym that stands for the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. A lot of our principles and frameworks around trauma informed care comes from them. They have a clearinghouse online and provide some basic points of discussion and a framework for people to follow. So it's really helpful. And so these 4 R's of trauma from care again are realize, recognize, respond, and resist. Simple words, right? You could put them on a post-it note, um, and but may require a lot of time to unpack. And so realize is the first element of it, and this is a kind of a flows through each level: realize, recognize, respond, and resist. Each one sort of builds on the other. And as we're going along here, if you have questions, feel free to post them, and I'll try to address them as in this kind of impromptu conversation on trauma informed care. So, first step is to realize, and it's probably the most helpful one in the profession, which is to realize that a lot of the behaviors and issues and concerns that we are addressing in our work come as a result of trauma. And we're double agents. Those of us who are professionals working in the field of trauma and trauma informed care also have experienced trauma. And so it requires a certain level of a lens of not just looking at other people, but also looking at ourselves. And this lens of trauma informed care essentially is a lens that helps us to redirect our perspective from what is wrong with you to what happened to you, rather than looking at these behaviors that might be scary or frightening or upsetting or frustrating, and then realizing that this individual has gone through trauma and that we've also gone through trauma, that they have experienced pain, that we've experienced pain, that the commonplace and commonality of suffering is something that we can all touch bases, whether we have the same particular issues or not. We all have had to suffer in life. And if we ask the question like, "What's wrong with you? Why are you acting this way?" Then we're going to focus on other individuals from a place of pathology, something broken or wrong in them. And if you've ever been attacked on or criticized or labeled, then you know that that's not going to help you open up and feel safe. That's going to actually do the opposite. It's going to cause you to shut down. So realizing that the first step that trauma is common and that much of what has gone on in the people that we're working with, are working alongside. might be as a result of trauma in their lives. That then allows us to recognize those specific signs as we learn and educate ourselves on the area of trauma and its impact behaviorally, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially. We begin to see those signs and recognize them for what they are. That recognition then allows us to respond and not react. Because now we're asking, what's happened to you, which allows us to go deeper into their story and to the events that might have led up to where they are today. Not excuses, but to understand the reasons. And our responses can be our own personal actions as well as our organizational policies and procedures. And by doing that, by going through this sense of uh, realizing, recognizing, and responding in a trauma informed, trauma sensitive way, that allows us then to resist re traumatization. That's probably the hardest of the four areas. Uh, and because a lot of the things that we do to get compliance or to get people to receive certain outcomes or try to apply certain interventions, if we're not using the other three, then we are end up re-traumatizing. I'll give you a simple example of this. I used to think early in my career that the whole goal of trauma healing was that somebody had to go through in minute detail every trauma that they've ever gone through. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. Uh, the first is a lot of people don't even remember all their trauma. And some of that trauma happens so early on in life that it's implicit versus explicit. They don't remember and or the mind shuts it off because it's too frightening, too overwhelming, and through its own process of protection, they can't access that. So how are we going to help them if we can't access that information? And when we force people to go back and look at things, like if you just get it off your chest, you just talk about it, you just explore all these areas of hurts, these wounds, then you'll feel better. Well, the other problem is that they don't. Oftentimes they get re traumatized all over again because they've just relived the experience. What's really crucial in trauma healing, and I'm curious if anyone has any more questions on this, or maybe an example of something you went through, when we re-experience that trauma, then we tend to shut down. We tend um, to to oh, what I was going to say is that the way in which we actually try to heal. I got off track there. The way we actually heal people is not just by going through every little memory that they've ever had, but to understand the core beliefs that have come from those things. That they have come to see themselves or believe about themselves. We call them assumptions. They're our assumptive world about ourselves, others, and our place in it. And that then affects how we hold relationships, how we are able to work through issues and problems in our life, how we see our worth and our value based on those situations. So the traumas are important, and sometimes acknowledging them is key to recognize that there is those wounds. But instead of re-experiencing them and re-traumatizing all over again, what's more important is that we are able then to understand the beliefs that we have gathered from that and how it's creating a certain set of assumptions about the world and ourselves in it. So healing comes from reprocessing those beliefs, not necessarily those early trauma memories. So let me just pause here and just see if there are any questions about these things that we were talking about or other things that you're having that you'd like to have me address. I'm going to bit of a question here because I'm going to make sure that video and audio is see if it's okay. I'm just saying video and audio okay. Question mark. There we go. Okay. So I'm just waiting to see if, it's froze or we're still alive. I could be just talking to myself, which I do. Do that occasionally. We all do. I'm not sure actually we're still alive. Okay. I think maybe just slow. Okay, we're still alive. That's good to hear. Okay, thanks, Bill. Appreciate that as well. Uh, yeah. So I think, Bill, you had a question. If you'd like to throw that in there, please do so. So we're just looking at the four R's, which when someone asked me what was trauma informed care, it was summarized in those four principles of realize, recognize, respond, and then resist, with the ultimate goal of trying to avoid re-traumatization, and then allowing us to work on some of the core issues that underline uh, those beliefs that have come as a result of those traumas. And traumas can be what we call little t traumas or big T traumas. Little t traumas are the daily life hassles and events that we all go through. The big T trauma are those cataclysmic kind of big events. We also have to differentiate between single incident events, like the big T traumas, and what we call complex PTSD or complex traumas that comes as a result of going throughout most of our developmental periods of childhood, experiencing various kind of hurts or repeated hurts over and over again. These have obviously a much more uh, pervasive impact, if you will, as a result of events. Not that a single incident event can't also impact us. And all of this trauma informed work and types of trauma that we go through are balanced around the idea of resiliency, which is the good news. Because if we didn't have resiliency as the other side of the equation, then we would be left with just those hurts and no real options for any hope of ability to heal from those things. What's interesting is that some people experience identical hurts and traumas that I might have experienced, and yet they didn't have the same kind of impacts or effects as I did. There's another concept in the trauma informed field described as the three E's, where we look at how the experiences that you and I go through, although they might be similar and we're similar sort of people, the effects of those can have very different impact on different people based on the concept of resiliency, the science of resiliency. And then in turn, that then um, will carry over into um, our lives and our relationships. So let's see, we have a question here. Someone is working with a mother-daughter who went through domestic violence over 6 to 7 years when the daughter was young. Um, oh, and then they're talking about the term trauma bonds in relationship to the 4 Rs. Daughter's in her 20s, exercising power over mom, restricting her social life and her other family contact. Any wisdom appreciated. Um, yeah, trauma bond is one of those sort of, how we say, I don't know if it's actually a clinical diagnosis. I think it's definitely something that is experiential and anecdotal, sort of describes unhealthy relationship as a result of the trauma that um, we've gone through. It's an unhealthy emotional attachment. Um, so it's a repetition of the cycle of abuse, um, and so, yeah, it is a buzz term, which is fine, we have a lot of buzz terms, and, that's not a problem. I think it relates more to the unhealthy emotional attachment, that forms as a result of 2 people going through trauma, and in some way, the bond idea is that because of the commonality of the experience, they tend to be, um, maybe enmeshed in a way that is unhealthy, but very difficult to break. I've seen this in various relationships, family dynamics, sibling sets, etc. And um, so it's a very strong bond or connection or allegiance, if you will, but um, to the detriment. There's a sense of we're not able to have good boundaries. We're not able to um, co-regulate as a result of these experiences, um, and it can perpetuate a cycle. Generation, intergenerational transmission of that abuse can be perpetuated on to the next generation as a result of that. Um, Part of that bonding element, also sort of refers to the idea of chemical imbalances as a result of those trigger releases, that sometimes is produced, in the chaos, right? The adrenaline, dopamine, and then the close enmeshment in terms of oxytocin. So a lot of those chemical things tend to draw us towards one another and make those bonds tighter. It doesn't necessarily mean it makes the relationship healthier. Um, so yeah. Okay. And someone's been working on their trauma through an EFT, emotional freedom technique, framework. Um, are you referring to the tapping? Are you referring to there's also an EFT that's referred to by Sue Johnson, who does couples work, but also utilizes a attachment lens and trauma informed lens to that. I assume you're just talking about the tapping. Emotional freedom technique. And tapping, emotional freedom technique is a tapping exercise that taps on various acupressure points of the body. Um, and in doing so, that allows them to process traumatic material while engaging somatically the body's ability to engage into a parasympathetic response, tapping on those pressure points. And it doesn't have to be like heavy, tapping, just light, tapping. Okay, so I was actually referring to the emotional focus therapy, um, of Sue Johnson's work. So yeah, it's excellent work that is grounded in, attachment and trauma-informed principles. And so that's a very healthy approach towards healing. And the other one, of the tapping is actually useful too. I remember first learning that technique and think, "This is kinda silly," tapping on pressure points on the body and face, and but then I, started to use it with some clients that weren't showing progress in other areas, and actually they did really well. And so I've continued to use it, and now it's, considered a evidence-based, or at least a promising evidence-based practice, that has shown some real effects. Particularly, they did some studies, in many of the techniques like emotional focus therapy and, other evidence-based like EMDR, tapping, uh, brain spotting, other ones, and what they've seen is a decrease in the size of the amygdala, which is our fight or flight detection system, or a early warning triggering system, in our middle of our emotional limbic system of our brain, which, when it's increased, it means it has been hyper responsive to trauma. And so when they show decreased size of that, that shows that there's a decreasing in traumatic responses. So that's where the amygdala plays into it. Amygdala means almond. It's a word for in Greek called almond. It looks like an almond. It's almond shaped anyway. Any other questions of people working through in terms of trauma informed care, the 4 Rs, or other trauma informed tools and techniques? So in my 30 years of working in the trauma-informed field, I tried to find some ways in which to apply the things that I was learning, and there's a lot. It just more and more developed over time, and I'm just trying to make sense of it all, and then also be able to apply that in a practical way for people, that they could actually use, and that I could actually use as well in terms of how to incorporate, all the body of literature. What I really come to find out, and many of these evidence-based practices are also, demonstrated, and a lot of this is developed in the work of, like, Peter Levine and, Bessel van der Kolk, Body Keeps a Score, and Peter Levine talks about Waking the Tiger, which looks at the needs of, the somatic needs that we have, and realizing that if we don't calm down the body and the behavior, the nervous system, and increase the capacity of that nervous system, any technique that we are trying to apply, just won't have sticking or lasting power. And it's frustrating for the clinician, it's frustrating for the individual who are trying to use primarily cognitive based techniques to deal with something that's largely stored in the nervous system. And many of the tools and techniques don't incorporate cognitive use of language at all, like art therapy and there's yoga and so somatic other techniques. I would say that they do have some cognitive components to them. And like I was referring to in terms of like the tapping, uh, and EMDR is also considered a somatic technique. They do incorporate cognitive. So the ideal way to deal with trauma is both body and mind, being able to connect both the somatic interventions as well as the cognitive interventions as well. But if we don't address the needs of the body, then you're going to have um, you won't have good outcomes and a lot of frustration with people. I've had people talk about their traumas and talk about details and really have no significant change. And then you then move to a more somatic based technique and suddenly they get breakthrough. So we calm down the nervous system and then we build up capacities. Oftentimes we're trying to address the cognitive coping skills and those kind of things first before dealing with the body and getting that to get into a calm resting state. So once they help people understand how to ground and get somatically regulated, then they can do the more cognitive work. And once they do the more cognitive work, then they're able to reach out and have more significant, healthy social relationships with themselves, with other people, with their higher power, so they're able to connect on a community wide spiritual sort of basis. But you have to sort of follow in that order. So, in order to incorporate those ideas and techniques into my work, I developed what was called the GROW technique. GROW, which stands for grounding, recognizing, opening, and walking. And it's a simple four-phase approach to dealing with trauma and trauma healing. Uh, G is for grounding, which is getting the body into a place of felt safety. And from that place of felt safety, then we're able to recognize the hurts and wounds that we're carrying, the burdens that we're dealing with, and then we're allowing from there, we can allow ourselves to open to a greater place of healing, to change our approach, to change our focus and intentions, to then develop those coping skills that we will need to help us once we've been able to come to a place of um, a regulation. And that's where we then walk it out, right? We have to sustain these things over time. And so walking is like taking one step. What's one step I need to take today? And then the next day, the next day, next day, and then I can sustain this over time, even if I have some setbacks along the way. So I ground, I recognize, I open, and then I walk it out. And so this techniques of the grow has really helped me. You can find a lot of this information that I have applied through to various different issues of trauma and healing and trauma informed care um, on my Trauma Champions newsletter. So hopefully you'll be able to dig deeper into those areas. But let me just see if there are any more questions that people are having on trauma-informed care or healing-based practices. So let's look at some other basic trauma-informed principles. We talked about the 4 Rs of realize, recognize, respond, and resist retraumatization. I mentioned briefly, even though I didn't address them, on the 3 E's, which is the event that people go through. It could be a single event or multiple events, could be a small T or big T trauma. Different experiences, people respond to those events in different ways based on different resiliency factors. And then the effects those will have on your health, your emotions, your relationships. So those are some of the basic principles that are part of what we call trauma-informed care, or this lens in which we see trauma. The other area, which focuses more on organizational sort of policies and procedures and practices, is called the 6 key principles of trauma-informed care. And those 6 key principles are safety, trustworthy and transparency, peer support, collaboration and choice, empowerment, and cultural and historical sensitivity. And again, these, like the other things that we've been talking about, the 4 Rs, the GROW method, they have sort of a hierarchy or a bit of a step-by-step phase model to them. So again, we start with safety, right? Safety is the number one key principle. Again, we talked about this with the 4 Rs, with the GROW method. That's essential for everything else we do. I think if we can just understand that in terms of trauma-informed care, that's going to radically change how we operate. Am I safe? How can I create safety for other people? And from there, when you have that safety, you can start developing trust and that is often developed as a result of transparency, where people know that they can trust you and what they see is what they get. And they can ask questions like, why am I answering this question? Why do I have to fill out this paperwork? And you're transparent with your answers. Peer support is also crucial because if you have people who are involved in the work that you do, who have been through there, have walked through the same shoes, can share personal experiences and help and have gone through the system and able to navigate other people, that's huge. So peer support in terms of people who can understand me because they are there or have walked through this issues in life are huge to developing that safety, that trustworthiness, and that transparency. I remember when I was running some mental health clinics, I had family advocates on board. There really wasn't a budget for them because they can't bill. We had to sort of cover the cost with that, but I needed to have family advocates, and we had two to cover the size of our program. But they would always hold me accountable. They would always make sure that we weren't talking acronyms when explaining issues to clients. They help clients walk through the steps in the process that um, we were, leading people through in terms of the interventions that we were offering in this community-based mental health program. So it was. And so they're essential in that. And some programs run completely on that peer support, which is amazing. The fourth area is that collaboration and choice. Do they have choices in the matter? Do they have to fill out this paperwork? Is there a different way they can fill out this paperwork? Do they have to come by themselves? Do they kind of bring people with them? They need to have some empowerment that they can make their own choices, and that's what moves into the next area, which is empowerment. Um, and part of that is how we convey a sense of importance. Like you are important. I don't drive this as a clinician your treatment plan, you drive your treatment plan, right? Because you have voice and choice, and you're seen as essential in terms of understanding you and what your needs are. You advocate to me, and I am asking and wanting to know your opinion. And then this also comes in a process of cultural sensitivity. It sort of broadens all the other principles because people want to know, will my beliefs and cultures and historical background and historical traumas and stuff be understood and respected? And so the answer of course, should be yes, and or If they're not, only because I'm naive and I need to be educated more on that, right? Even though I try to educate myself and learn more about 'em, there's always things I can learn, and the best place to learn that is from the individual themselves, who can explain and share where their backgrounds or beliefs have come from. And then and my opinions and biases and judgments are set down. Um, and we don't operate from that perspective. We don't totally get separate from those things because we're human beings. But again, it's that trustworthiness, that transparency. I understand, I don't understand, help me know more of, what that's like for you. So those are key principles that helps us. Um, so another question here is, someone's in a cohort, to be a peer support specialist in a recovery. That's great. Yeah, they're so important to help walk people through things. They probably were the most important people in my community-based mental health program. Um, yeah, thank you everybody for dropping in. I'm sorry again for the problems we had with technology, um, but yeah, it comes with the territory, right? Um, I'll just kind of end on a note of resiliency. That might be the best way to go at this point. Um, you know, Science of resiliency is a talk in and of itself, but it just says that what we go through is predictable, um, and what is predictable is preventable. So, resiliency has a lot to do with our strong social connections, the effective coping mechanisms that we have learned along the way, the support systems that come alongside us, and also a sense of just our own positive belief. A lot of our ability to overcome things is that we believe we can. It's a bit of a mindset, right? It's not a mind over matter exactly, but it's a key piece to the whole equation. And obviously, these are interchangeable because, on the one hand, if you've gone through negative experiences, you tend to have negative thoughts and feelings. Negative thoughts and feelings kind of perpetuate themselves in more negative experiences. And so it's a difficult situation to untangle. And again, that's where that sensitivity and patience comes in helping people understand what some of their core beliefs and values are about themselves and their future and their life to help them move forward. But there is sort of a spontaneous change of growth of resiliency that happens in an individual. And it's called post traumatic growth. So a lot of people understand what post traumatic stress means, but they don't really understand what the concept of post traumatic growth is. And it's a huge body of literature that says that basically two-thirds of all individuals who go through a traumatic event will naturally evolve into a new set of assumptions following their trauma, which will allow them to have some what they call post-traumatic growth benefits, kind of a silver linings, I suppose you could call it that. And you don't want to go through trauma to have to get these things, but oftentimes because we do, there is an ability to break through and see yourself in new ways. You begin to develop new, healthier relationships. You begin to uh, believe in new possibilities for your future. You begin to have a deeper sense of faith and spirituality, which isn't necessarily religion. It might believe a sense of something bigger and more important than who you are in life, and gives you some meaning and purpose in life. So these different benefits come as a result naturally through the experience of going through traumatic events. Uh, so hopefully some of these things are helpful. I'm just giving an overview of of some issues. Um, so I, if any last minute questions, feel free to post them there. And if not, then I will wrap up. Thanks for your time and patience with the technology. I hope you'll visit Trauma Champions to get more information and learning. If you'd like to get certified in trauma informed care, you can look at our website at traumatoolbox.com. And then lastly, if you want to be part of an online community of support, this is a free um, support system. It's on the school framework, SKOOL, and you can just go to growheal.me. It's growheal.me, growheal.me, and that's a free online community for individuals who want to just get some support. Anyway, thanks so much for being a part of this. I'm going to sign off, and I hope the rest of you have a blessed day.